So Rob Dreher says, I'm not worried about what Rachel Held Evans has to say about the Benedict option, though if she actually reads it one day, it would be interesting to see if she still stands by her erroneous prejudices. No. What I'm worried about is that far in the future, should the police come looking for dissident Orthodox Christians hiding out from the state persecution, the Rachel Held Evanses of the world will point helpfully and patriotically and say, they're in the basement, officer. What's really funny about this is that Rob Dreher is going through some pretty weird fan fiction he's making up in his head. So I just want to take this an extra step and maybe write this out a little bit more explicitly for him and in the form of some Rob Dreher persecution, Rachel Held Evans fanfic. So here we go. An officer of the liberal Nazi police approaches the door of the grand Rachel Held Evans stronghold of Christian liberalism. Checking his notes and straightening his rainbow-emblazoned cap, he moves to knock on the door. His knock echoes fascistly through the quiet and liberal neighborhood. After a few minutes, Rachel Held Evans herself approaches and opens the door. Hello, officer. What can I help you with? She says. Miss Held Evans, we have heard reports that you're harboring small Orthodox Christians in the basement of your house. Of course, you know this is illegal. All true Christians must be brought to the re-education camp. Rachel smiles liberally. Yes, I know the law quite well. I was instrumental in the legislation myself. She removes a small leather case from her pocket and holds it up in front of the officer. There's a small gold shield adorning the front of the case with the words, Secret Liberal Police, emblazoned across the front. Don't worry, Rachel continues. I'm merely rounding them up for you. The true Benedict option Christians are in the basement, officer.
Hi, I'm Dean.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to the Magnificast. The Magnificast is a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. In this episode, we're talking about the option.
So let's just go ahead and catch up a bit from our last episode. So, Dean, what are you reading?
I actually just gave a paper at the Toronto School of Theology about Paulo Freire. So I reread Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and then I was reading some kind of interesting articles on Marxist pedagogy, which actually ties into a guest that we're going to have in the next episode, Derek Ford. He's done a bunch of stuff on communist pedagogy, and I was chatting with him a little bit about it. So that's mostly what I've been reading. And now that paper is over, I guess I'm like taking a break.
Legit, that's cool. I'm psyched for that Derek Ford thing. That's going to be awesome. I've been getting ready for class tonight. I teach at a school, by the way, everybody. And tomorrow we're talking about media literacy, one of my nerdiest and favoritist topics. So I've been reading this book called Net Smart by this guy named Howard Rheingold. It's really neat. It's basically just some really introductory level stuff about how digital culture works. It's not super critical or anything, but it's neat enough.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's all right. It's just an older guy writing about the internet, which comes off like your dad telling you stuff about how to Google. I don't know.
That sounds good, actually.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not critical at all though, and it definitely falls into this language about mindfulness. That I don't really like, but it's okay. Yeah, I guess what else have you been up to other than reading?
What else have I been up to? Well, I got back from visiting you not long ago, where we recorded the first episode of the Magnificast.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been doing a lot, but nothing super interesting. I did go to a party recently with the Communist Party of Canada, some folks from that group, and yeah, it was a fun thing to do.
A Communist Party.
Yes, exactly. A Communist Party. Yeah, it was great. They sent me home. Mr. J. Watts sent me home with a lovely little book about the young Fidel that he got in Cuba. It's in Spanish, so I can't read it, but I'm
Awesome.
very thankful for it.
How communist are they?
I mean, they're the Communist Party of Canada,
Right,
so
but they're not like the Communist Party of the United States, right?
they are fraternally related to the CPUSA, but they are not exactly on the same page about a variety of issues. I shouldn't speak for them, really. I guess I don't know
Oh, okay.
how at liberty I would be, but suffice it to say, I would say more communist than the Communist Party of the United States.
That's very good,
they
actually.
they did not endorse Hillary Clinton. We'll put it that way.
Nice. Good. As no communist party should. Ridiculous. Crazy stuff. Okay. Well, neat. I was on spring break, and I did like the most I don't know, like midwestern and also like middle class thing. I and my family went to Branson, Missouri. Oh my god. Well, we met like some of our friends there, and it was really fun. Like we had a good time, but god, it's just like a terrible place. Like everything is just banjos and guns and I don't know, stuff. It's
That place is like, I feel like you should only visit it like with a copy of any book by Baudrillard.
yeah, it is. It's that for sure. I did get to ride some go karts, and that was pretty good. I liked go karts. There's
Can't
this.
be.
I mean, like Branson's like really well known for all of its like crazy shows or whatever. There's literally a theater on the main drag that's called like the God and Country Theater, and they had like a passion play going on. It's like it's Lent, dudes. Like it's not time
So
for
it's the
that
God
yet.
side, less the countryside in that show.
That's right. The countryside was right after. I think it was just like a Elvis Presley impersonator or something. It's like it's so Baudrillardian though. Everything is like a simulation of a simulation. It's like everyone's cousins, like the cousin of anyone famous is performing there. Like Elvis Presley's cousins there, Michael Jackson's cousins there. They're all there. All the cousins. They're all hanging out. It's a really
Someday, the cousin of Matt Brinico will go as a visitor.
yeah, that's right. One of my cousins will be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably true. Actually, I mean, I think I have family that live in that area, so probably real. Anyways, it's an absolutely ridiculous place, but they got go karts, so I don't know. What are you gonna do about that?
Ride them.
Ride the go karts. Yeah, man.
Matt, how did you smash capitalism in the last couple weeks, having gone to Branson?
No, I think you're confused. I supported capitalism while I was there, like drastically so. We did make some hard choices to like basically do nothing other than riding go karts while we were there. So I guess that was cool. Sort of withdrew a bit. So like my son was there and he was like going crazy. He wanted to go do everything, but we kept like not because it looked really sad and depressing from the outside. So like for example, there was like this like I don't know, some type of like zoo, but it was like a zoo you pay for, a zoo slash arcade, which is like the worst idea. It was like in this like old rundown looking building, and you could pay like $30 to go inside and see the tigers and wolves or whatever. But we
Oh my
just
gosh.
we made a hard pass on that because we didn't want to be depressed about animal cruelty. I mean like that was I mean had I been more of a Marxist at that moment, maybe I would have like liberated those animals or something. I have no idea. It's just like a really sad and depressing place.
Everything you're saying makes me feel like Rod Dreher is right. We should really mourn the decline of Western civilization.
Well, he's not 100% wrong. Just a little. Like I would say 85% wrong. I don't know. All right, well, let's talk about Rod Dreher. Okay, so maybe you don't know who Rod Dreher is. Maybe you don't know what the Benedict option is yet, and that's not a big deal. So let me just tell you. Here's a quick summary of like what this whole thing is about. Rod Dreher is a dang turkey who writes for the American Conservative, which is like a blog, newsy website. You know, one of those. He recently wrote a book called The Benedict Option. Basically, the Benedict Option is built on the premise that Christianity is being forced to be more worldly than it ought to be. Overall, Dreher proposes a conservative and homophobic version of like Shane Claiborne-esque intentional communities where Christians can withdraw from the world into their own prefigured communities. What would your elevator pitch for the Benedict option be? Like if you had to just like sell someone on it really quick.
Yeah, okay. If I was stuck in an elevator and I had to say something about the Benedict option and I had to pitch it, I would say hey, do you wake up every morning and think that like the government is going to come into your house and tell you that you have to love the gays or not? Is that something that freaks you out every day? You wake up in a cold sweat after these night terrors. Have I got an option for you? At which point I would explain. I've dug out a compound about 3 miles from this elevator exactly, and it's lined with concrete walls. John Goodman is there. It's
Oh God.
it's it's better than it sounds. But yeah, that would be my elevator pitch. You can come stay here. The government won't know where you are, and yeah, we'll break bread together.
That sounds terrible.
It appeals. There's a demographic.
Yeah. Okay. I guess so. Yeah, I think that's pretty good though. I mean, like it's all the Benedict adoption is all about being kind of afraid of the government in some way. It's a real skepticism toward the state, which I can really get behind. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's more than one way to be skeptical of the state, I guess.
Yeah, but it's like skeptical of the state for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I just like that the scenario is like, are you afraid that the government will make you be okay with gay people? Then come live in our hole.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well here's a question for you to just sort of ease us into this conversation. If you could turn Rod Dreher into any kind of animal, what kind of animal would you turn him into? This is a good party icebreaker, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I would say a red panda.
Okay. Do you have any illuminating insights as to why Rod Dreher would be a red panda?
Because I feel like I would like him better. Just he would be less repulsive.
That's
to me.
fair.
Yeah. Man, after kind of immersing myself in Dreherism over the last week, I just don't like him so much. He's so smug.
Yeah, he's a hard one.
His blog is rough. I can't deal with it.
Yeah, that blog. I just love that it is the American conservative, like as though it's like somehow above the fray of pundit politics or like GOP Democrat debates. It's like something more true or deep, like the conservative agenda or something. But in fact, it's just like it actually is kind of worse.
Yeah. Let's like. Okay, so he's a red panda. That makes it way better. Like I could like face him then.
Yeah, that's right.
But let's talk about that, like just the name of his blog for a second, because I think it's pretty revealing. Okay, it's the American conservative, and I think that everything about the Benedict option is like grasping at at conservation in every single way. I mean, like cloistering yourself in a community of other people cut off from the world, or cut off from like culture at large, at least. Is trying to conserve something so hard, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's insane.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that? So of all people, I can't even believe that I'm going to endorse this person's comment because I don't like him in most other scenarios. But there's a guy named Peter Leithart. He's like a Protestant. I don't know. He's like a conservative who reads postmoderns. That's like his shtick. Anyway,
good niche.
He had a pretty good take where he basically said the important thing to think about when you consider the Benedict option is what is the question to which it is the answer. And when he put it that way, he suggests that the question is essentially what do you do when the West is just like, in decline, essentially. And then the answer is the Benedict option. And he rightly criticizes that as being, a bad idea. That's like that's a bad question to start answering, and then to answer in this kind of way. And I think blogging at a place like the American Conservative, it's already that kind of assumption right away.
The whole thought behind the Benedict option is trying to construct trying to construct on the one hand an ideological bunker to make sure you're safe in, but also constructing a real bunker that you really want to live in with other people. Is sort of, I don't know, just so conservative, trying to take everything that you hold dear about like Western culture and Western Christianity, and making sure that no one can like no one can get to it in a destructive way.
Yeah, and I should say too, like, so I don't identify as a conservative, but there are conservatives that I actually respect. But when I think of conservatives, I think of people like Wendell Berry or something, where what you're trying to conserve is some kind of weird idea about the importance of the land or your neighbors, or something about like actual human relationships, or even like Hannah Arendt. Like, she strikes me as a very conservative person, but obviously not in the same kind of way that Rod Dreher is. So I only want to put that out there to say, like, I don't think conservative is a dirty word per se, even though I don't happen to be one, but Rod Dreher's conservatism is very bad.
Well, I think we can make some kind of differentiation here. Like all ideologies have to have like a modicum of conservation within them, or else they wouldn't be a lasting ideology, right? Like,
Right.
I don't know. Like, I mean, Christianity has like Christianity, I mean, is like a huge term, but like the church in America or something, or my church in America, to even be more specific, has like a modicum of conservatism in it, that we want to maintain a certain set of traditions and beliefs. To me, the problem isn't conservation, because that's just what we do. To me, the problem is conserving bad traditions.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that the Benedict option is about that, about preserving and conserving bad traditions.
Yeah, well, not even that, but Dreher has this kind of strange identification with his Southern roots or Southern culture that comes out in different columns, and it's very hard to tell what you would even be trying to conserve, oftentimes outside of a very weird, like, blatant white supremacism. And I think that's the real danger here, is that the things that are being conserved are basically like massive hegemonies that people on the left have worked very hard to break up, and that's what he's so afraid of.
Reflecting on the idea of conservatism a bit, there's kind of a little bit of a back and forth between like his blog and Twitter that Rachel Held Evans got into a little bit, which I appreciate. Rachel Held Evans isn't 100% awesome all the time, but she's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah. So Rachel Held Evans was saying that like what was basically at the bottom of like all of Rod Dreher's sort of thought is the idea that Christians are persecuted in America, and that's a pretty weird thing. How do you think conservatism plays into that like idea of persecution? Because it seems like persecution has like a pretty central role in all of this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all you have to do is look at Dreher's response to Rachel Held Evans' Twitter thread, which you lampooned in the beginning of the episode of the show. He literally says, here's from his blog, which I have in front of me. He says, "I'm not worried about what Rachel Held Evans has to say about the Benedict option, though if she actually reads it one day, it would be interesting to see if she still stands by her erroneous prejudices." That sentence is hilarious, by the way.
Yeah.
No, what I'm worried about is that far in the future, should the police come looking for dissident Orthodox Christians hiding out from the state persecution, that Rachel Held Evanses of the world will point helpfully and patriotically and say, "They're in the basement, officer."
There's like so much going on with this weird thing. I don't know how to think about it rightly.
I mean, it's interesting to me that he owns the persecution complex.
Yeah, for sure. He like 100% thinks it's real, and that he like it's something that is real and he needs to respond to, and he's doing it in the Benedict option.
Yeah, it's very interesting too that his criticism of Rachel Held Evans is not like, oh, she says that I'm afraid of persecution and therefore, she's misread me or whatever. It's like, she says that and she's wrong. If she read my book, she would know that she is really persecuted, or we are really persecuted or something. It's a really weird criticism because it doesn't really address anything she said exactly.
It's a weird criticism, but like a really strong rhetoric though at the same time.
Yeah.
Like staying above the polemic. Like he's not going to get into like a close reading of his own work with Rachel Held Evans. He's just going to be like, "No, you're wrong," and move on. I think it's like, I mean, it's not good because it's dismissive and like ultimately stupid, but I think it's a strong rhetorical move. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's basically Rod Dreher's whole shtick, right? Is strong rhetorical move after strong rhetorical move with no real substantive argument.
Oh my god, yeah, exactly. Well, so yeah, when I was doing like the silly fanfic thing at the beginning, something that's like I guess hard for me to get my mind around just so much is the way that the police work in this like weird fantasy that he has. So okay, so to recap, the fantasy is that he will be he and Benedict option Christians in the future will be so ostracized from mainstream culture that they will have to hide out in the basements of liberal Christians. So, I mean, like, okay, I know that's like a silly thing, but maybe we can stop and psychoanalyze him for a second because it's so weird the way that authority and culture and power work in this made up world that he has.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, the obvious implication here, like in the way he's talking about this, is that like there's like a sort of fascist regime, and then they're the people hiding out that have to be like cloistered in the basement. It's so strange because it seems like their position would be something a fascist regime could kind of get behind, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like Rod Dreher thinks that his position and the position of the Benedict option is so radical that the state will literally fear it and then in turn like need to come after them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you get this impression that he feels like he is, one of the early Christians in whatever, pick your like Roman emperor, just waiting to get thrown to the lions or something. But then his fantasy is this kind of strange, like, it's like the beginning of Inglourious Bastards, where like Christoph Waltz is going to knock on Rachel Held Evans' door and like demand to find out where Rod Dreher is hiding, and I think that is so crazy to me because you're exactly right. If anything, it's so. I think it would be wrong to say that Rod Dreher is, I don't know, like he's not an alt-right fascist in the same way that there are alt-right fascists, but like clearly alt-right fascists are like, if they're close to any kind of Christianity today, it's something like Rod Dreher's super weird, like fascist fear of like feminazis. I mean, he even uses like SJW, like unironically in his columns, so
Right.
yeah, like obviously there's a kinship there.
But obviously in this like made up sort of fantasy universe, Rachel Held Evans is doing us a real service, I think, in pointing out that Rod Dreyer's in her basement.
Yeah,
that's really good of her.
Yeah, I agree. You almost wish that the fantasy was more like communist secret police, and maybe you'd be a little more sympathetic to the authority regime or something.
That's right. It'd be like East Germany, and be like, well, all right, see ya. That's probably really insensitive, but I don't know. It's
Matt Bernicka's a tanky. You heard it here.
East Germany. It wasn't as bad as everyone said, right? It probably was. It was probably exactly that bad. I don't know. I mean, it's just like the Benedict option poses no actual threat to any type of government. I mean, except that they have like stupid views about gender and marriage. Like that's it. Like it's not like anything that they say or want to do is like so outside the norm that the secret police would show up and like get them. It's just stupid and boring, like what people have thought for like hundreds of years in America. Like quit.
That's right.
You're not edgy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no real way in which this would ever even probably sprawl to such a degree that anyone would care. Like, and the current like political regime is obviously a huge fan of the kind of thing that Rod Dreher is saying. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
People who voted for Donald Trump are all working with the same persecution complex. At the end of the day, it's like they won and they're still upset about it.
Yeah. Well, so one of Rachel Held Evans' tweets about the Benedict option was, okay, so this is what she said. White Christians have enough influence to hand Donald Trump the presidency. They are not a marginalized group in our society. Like, it's like as simple as that. It's like, yeah, those people are the hegemony. Like, they're not like the counter hegemony at all. They're not marginalized. It's just get over it. You're in charge, I guess.
Yeah. For the worse, we should remind them.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they should go live in a basement. I don't know.
I mean, really, we should encourage them to push this a little bit further. Like, disconnect from the internet. Have no connection with the outside world. Like, because who knows who's listening in? Some surely liberal Rachel Held Evanses of the NSA are hoping to catch Rod Dreher. Watching him through his computer
That's right.
camera or whatever.
I mean, like
Uh,
being real about it. I mean, like I don't know, like Google's out there, like lurking on your blog posts or something. Like they know, man. they
yeah,
they
yeah.
know about your positions, and they don't care either.
Google Earth coordinates.
Yeah, they've got him. The Google car drives past his house several times a day.
The Benedict bunker.
The Benedict bunker. What do you think the Benedict bunker looks like? I mean, as
Oh my gosh.
both of us are such fans of architecture and design, like what would you imagine Rod Dreher like sort of designing his bunker to look like?
Oh man, I have to imagine that it would be like the lowest budget version of like Bilbo Baggins' house in like the first Lord of the Rings, but it's not like cool. It's like they couldn't get the hang of like siding down like rounded doors or walls, so it's just kind of like jagged like holes in the side of hills. That's what I expect.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's fine. It's a good aesthetic. Why not?
it's good for them.
Yeah, that's right. That's what architecture ought to be.
I was just thinking of like an abandoned strip mall, and they're like, and there's in there. At the beginning of this, I said that Rod Dreher isn't always bad, or maybe the Benedict option isn't always bad. It's kind of an interesting move of thought for someone on the right because it mirrors so exactly the like a move on the left. In the early 2000s, like new monasticism and the whole Shane Claiborne, Stanley Hauerwas thing was so
Yeah.
popular. Like intentional communities were like like a real mobilizing idea, and this is sort of the right cashing in on those.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, okay, I'm gonna say this and then I might immediately take it back.
Okay.
But it's sort of like in the same way that somebody like Richard Spencer is intentionally co-opting the language of identity politics, because it's effective in significant ways, and it does name something that people think and feel. There's like an analogy here, I think, where yeah, basically it's the right cashing in on the same sort of sources but reading them differently, which is kind of an interesting cultural moment in a way to see almost like early 2000s Obama years, somewhat left liberalism now getting like spun hard to the right because there are pragmatic things about it that work.
Yeah, I think so. Or the things that work. I don't know. Or maybe they just appeal to people on a really rhetorical level, like the way that like Shane Claiborne appeals to people on a real rhetorical level. I mean, like I read Jesus for President and the other one.
The Irresistible Revolution.
Right, wrote both of those, and I thought living in an intentional community would be awesome, but I never
Yeah.
did it. It was just like really like a great a great idea where I moved into a commune or something.
I visited New Jerusalem in Philadelphia when I was like 19,
Oh yeah,
because I was so into this stuff, and I had some friends who ended up starting some intentional communities or like somewhat intentional communities in Grand Rapids. So I lived there. I didn't live in them, but yeah, I mean, it's persuasive, right? Especially for Christians, I think, because there is this whole problem of being in the world and not of it. You're stuck here, but like you're supposed to be different. So how do you work that out? And intentional communities, like moving into poor neighborhoods and like trying your best to actually participate with them, like there's something compelling about that on the new monasticism side.
yeah, for sure. In my undergrad, I got to take this cool trip to Chicago. It's like a thing that all freshmen get to do at my school, and we went to this place in Chicago called Reba Place Fellowship. It's like a Mennonite intentional community in the city, which is pretty unique, I think. I don't really know. It was neat though because they're doing just this. They have like a commune, they have a common person, all that kind of stuff. And it was really Shane Claiborne-y in a really good way. And I remember being there and like, hello, I would like to move here. But like the left sort of version of this, the new monasticism, has like the left version of this seems easier to work out since it's about like sort of putting communitarian Christian practices in place in a community, right? Whereas on the right, it seems harder to do that. I mean, Rod Dreher doesn't critique like private property or like anything like that. You know, he's not trying to suggest that we ought to be like the church in Acts or something like that. So
He does have a certain critique of the market, but it's a standard conservative critique. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if he cares that the market like structurally exploits laborers or whatever, but I guess he's more upset about the way in which the free market under capitalism creates social disruptions that he doesn't like, and that there's no way of really mitigating, which is kind of a weird critique of capitalism.
well, I mean, but doesn't his critique about the market end up just being about like, well, you won't be able to get a job if you hate gay people or something like that? Is that
That
kind
could
of,
be, yeah.
I mean, that's what I've seen on his blog at least. I
Right.
don't know. So yeah, I don't know. Do you think that new monasticism is the left version of the Benedict option?
I think in a lot of ways that's probably not too much of a stretch. I guess it's sort of anachronistic because it was around before, as far as I know. Even though the
Right.
Benedict option has been like a thing for a while, like he's been blogging about it for I don't know, like a decade or something, which is kind of embarrassing if you think about it. But
Yeah, for sure.
so yeah, maybe it would be better to say that the Benedict option is like the right version, like the right wing version of new monasticism or
Yeah.
something like that. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like splitting the hairs doesn't really matter. I think that's right. There is something about it. They both have similar sources. Like they both tend to, in the kind of scholarly literature around these movements, cite people like Alistair MacIntyre. I mean, that's where the Benedict option rhetoric comes from, and
Right.
you see that kind of stuff in new monastic writers. And even a recovery of monastics, right? That's a huge thing for new monasticism, but it also is a huge thing for Rod Dreher types. There's a liturgical focus. There's an emphasis on the traditions of the church and how those things rub up against culture more broadly defined or whatever. I think that's right.
It makes me wonder, though. I mean, as someone, Rod Dreher is so concerned with conservatism and like Western culture. Like, what's wrong with old monasticism? I mean, like, there are lay communities of like monastic orders. Like, it's a real thing. I don't know. It's just, or like, I don't know, like Mennonites, the Amish, Mormons have like a real strong sort of communitarian ethic, but are, to the right. These things already exist. Maybe Rod Dreher should spend less time blogging about it and just like go and visit some people that are already doing it. I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Well, okay, so maybe there's a left and there's a right thing going on here. I mean, new monasticism is cool, but I'm like not really sold on the idea. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a phase in my adolescence, which I don't say dismissively. Like, I think that they seem to do really cool stuff in Philadelphia and elsewhere. It's like it would be hard for me to say that I'm not at least somewhat impressed by the things that come out of it. Like, they have like a strong anti-death penalty stance that they like actively work on. Like, it's not a matter of like sharing memes or whatever. Like, they find out like who's on death row and they promote it and they try to get folks to, write like their legislators and wardens and whatever. Like, there's no denying that there is an organization that happens there. And I don't know, there's probably all kinds of important critiques to be made about whatever, like savior complexes and things like that on the part of Christian people. But like, there's something interesting happening, but it's obvious, like, it's not my political position. It's not politics, I think, in a significant way, actually. I don't
Yeah,
know. What do you think about it?
yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, also, I mean, very much a part of my like, I don't know, coming to terms with leftism. Like that was definitely like first stop after Lul, probably. Definitely like really interesting. Like, yeah, I don't have any like real like qualms about what they do. Yeah, the death row stuff is huge. And like the way that they actually engage with their communities, like that they live in, I think is like really good. I guess what I don't really find so great about it is that the main assumption is just that like working at the like a really small local level, things will change. Like, I don't know. There's no structural critique to come out of that. I mean, maybe some of those guys can like still make them or something, um, but it's just like too small to be really political to me, or it's too small for me to really care about it in like a really important way. I think like having those types of communities is great, but like let's think bigger. I don't know. Maybe this is why I'm actually a Marxist and not an anarchist.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how I feel about it as well. I mean, it's the kind of thing where, like, I wouldn't attribute this to any specific new monasticism person or whatever, even if they're still around. I don't know. But it wouldn't be surprising to hear something like, hey, if you were talking to a new monastic, would you consider, like, joining this party, like the Party for Socialism and Liberation or something? And it would be surprising to me if they like actively did do things like that, like maybe the DSA or something, but not like a movement building like party. That would be a surprise to me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, so much of the new monasticism stuff, at least in my experience, is based on Stanley Hauerwas and John Howard Yoder, and both of those guys aren't super interested in voting and like liberal politics in general. So I think that they would be pretty, I don't know, reluctant to get involved in something like at a larger scale.
Yeah, and there is a critique to be made of like liberal politics and voting, but it's true that without some kind of I don't know, like it's different when somebody like Alain Badiou says you shouldn't vote than when somebody like Stanley Hauerwas says you shouldn't vote, which isn't like an endorsement of Badiou per se, but it's just like a qualitatively different kind of recommendation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, since we're last week we talked about Ellul a little bit. Do you think there's a connection between both the Benedict option and new monasticism stuff and Ellul's anarchism? Because I see a kind of clear connection there. But what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, especially this desire for a kind of pristine space that's carved out from whatever the current political order. And there's a similar suspicion, almost an unqualified suspicion of that which is not Christian in an interesting sort of way, especially in terms of political things that aren't explicitly Christian. Even down to the almost like cosmic pessimism that you find in both of them. There's this strong emphasis on fallibility and sin and clearly everything is just like going to hell in a handbasket. And even if you tried to fix it, you actually wouldn't. So like, you might as well just not. Like that seems to be a similar kind of thread. And Dreher does quote Ellul on his blog. Like I was searching that a little bit. I didn't see him quote Anarchy and Christianity, which isn't to say that he doesn't, but it was more stuff on technology. But, those things are not entirely disconnected.
Right. I mean, to me, the connection is just like the connection is with that weird stuff about like the cows living on top of the hill in Ellul. Like, you don't need to vaccinate your cows; they're going to live on top of a hill, and they won't get any they won't get contaminated or like catch any diseases. And just like that, I think the Benedict option is at least advocating for something similar. Like, we're going to live apart from society, so we don't kind of get all of that gross cultural stuff in our like church or whatever.
Yeah.
New monasticism probably less so, since they live amongst people and they're like very active outwardly. But it's wanting that pristine space to live in, I think.
Yeah.
All of that, like, to say, I think that like we shouldn't completely discount the idea of withdrawal, like, from society. I know that like it's such a historically important anarchist idea about like sort of withdrawing from capitalism and like doing something else, but I don't think anyone in America has ever done it quite right. Or let me rephrase that in a less colonialist way. I don't think anyone in the United States has ever done it right. Whenever I think of withdrawal, I always think of the Zapatistas, and like they have done just that. They have like taken a space, won it through a fight, and withdrawn, and are still, though, very active in like the politics of Mexico, especially as of late. I don't know. Can you think of any other examples of people? I don't know, like how withdrawal works successfully in a society, or your thoughts on withdrawal and abstraction?
Yeah, what comes to my mind is actually like the base communities in Brazil, which are wrapped up in liberation theology, they solve a variety of problems. One being a shortage of clergy, but another being a political problem. A lot of these were like rural areas that didn't have access to services, and were being actively screwed over by imperialism. And basically, it was a model of withdrawal, assuming that the government just isn't going to help you out for whatever reason, and nobody else is either. So you might as well like try to build some kind of solidarity community. It's interesting because I almost have anytime I think about American politics in relationship to like Latin American politics or elsewhere even, I often have these kind of like Adorno worries where it's like, well, yeah, like that works there because those people are like actually aware of the ways in which they're being exploited and they're not like, I don't know, like sucked up into the culture industry or something. But would it work here? Like, is withdrawal even like an effective kind of political resistance? And I don't know. I mean, on my better days, I kind of feel like, yeah, like we should totally do that. Like there should be whatever American like base communities or Zapatista groups or something. But like on most days, I'm basically like, well, okay, I'm going to get on the streetcar and like go to school.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I don't know. Maybe it's just a matter of class consciousness or something like that. Like we just don't have it. It wouldn't. I mean, like, you can barely get people to strike on any given day, let alone like start an autonomous community or something.
Withdrawal is kind of a weird political strategy. It works, but it's risky and it has its own limitations, especially in different parts of the world, presumably anyway. Are there any kind of models for political engagement and specifically like Christian leftist political engagement that you think would be more compelling than, say, new monasticism or obviously the Benedict option, which would be literally anything?
It's hard to put it in terms of like an explicitly Christian opinion about this or like an explicitly Christian approach. I mean, I think that there's so much in new monasticism and the Benedict option that is just like kind of okay. Like forming like strong Christian bonds like with people you go to church with seems like a good thing.
Yeah.
Supporting like stupid like traditional understandings of like gender or something, not so good at all. So I think that like having those strong communities great or whatever, but I think that it's more important to be like active and engaged in large national movements and organizations. Just like I guess like outing myself right now, like I'm a DSA member for better or worse. And I don't know, I went to the meeting, I talked with people, and it was a good time, and like I let them know I was also kind of a Christian, not kind of a Christian, like I let them know I explicitly was a Christian. They're like, yeah, that's cool, man, no big deal. And and I just like had a conversation about it. It was like, I think it was a good thing. I don't know, the political values of the DSA I think align pretty well with at least my expression of Christianity. So I think like joining those national movements are pretty okay.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to consider the ways in which Christianity has found common cause with other leftist projects elsewhere in the world. For example, in the Philippines, I remember reading this great paper. I'll like link it on our blog or something, but basically it's about what's called the theology of struggle, which is this thing that emerged from Catholic Filipinos who, recognized that they were being exploited and couldn't figure out how to address it on their own. And they ended up joining the Communist Party of the Philippines, and they did it as Christians and as communists. And the recognition was mutual. And it's this kind of, the article I read paints it in a, sort of beatific light in a way, but it seems to be written from sort of a nonpartisan, like ethnographic view, which is just to say that in other parts of the world, like Christians don't have that much of an anxiety about joining like real life actual parties that are not like garbage mirrored parties of liberalism like we have in the US via the Republicans and Democrats and I think that's like a really important way of kind of maybe not avoiding withdrawal, but at least like supplementing it with some kind of way of, building the coalitions that you would need to really make a change.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, if you're going to withdraw, you have to put that energy somewhere, I guess, right? Or like, withdraw from some things and put that withdrawal in another place. So like a national party or like even like local politics or something like that would be great. I don't know. I don't share that same fear and hand wringing over like participating in politics. I think that other Christians do. I don't know. Do you think that's like an American thing or just like I don't know. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I don't really know. It's hard to say. I mean, there is a kind of purity politics that is very convenient when things aren't going your way in politics, and that is a very American problem, I think, for a lot of Christians. That so whatever, like you don't like the way if you're a conservative, you don't like the way the conservative parties are turning out, like the Republicans or even like the Tea Party movement or whatever. So you retreat into something like the Benedict option because, well, you're clean from all of what's going on out there, even if you might like blog about it or something. And that seems, that I'm sure that happens in other parts of the world, but there is a kind of rugged American individualism about that, I think.
Yeah, and there's definitely, I mean, not even on the right. I mean, not just on the right, even like that's like a total leftist fear
Yeah,
problem too, right? I mean, that's what we saw in the Lul last week.
right.
Just like the need to be separate and apart from any coercion or violence or something like that. That seems politically like just hard and kind of pointless to do at some points. Um,
Yeah,
like it's like Christians. I mean, like I don't know. Christians in general are like these weird Sartian kind of people who feel like they have this like extreme freedom to bear, and every single decision a party makes will reflect badly on them in heaven or something. It's
right, right.
so bizarre.
Yeah, speaking of that, and speaking of American kind of Christian ways of sorting this out, there was a good article in America Magazine, the magazine that I occasionally write for, by a guy named James Keene. The title of it was "What Would Thomas Merton and Daniel Berrigan Say About the Benedict Option?" It turns out, I mean, spoiler alert, he thinks they wouldn't have been fans.
So Thomas Merton and Daniel Berrigan are both Catholics.
Right, that's right. So it's interesting. I mean, he sort of goes through and makes a case for why that is, why he thinks they wouldn't be on board. But I think one of the things that struck me the most, and I think you actually pulled it out. I sent this article to you earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, this quote from William Stringfellow. I don't know, maybe you could read it because I think that's like it actually summarizes a lot of at least how I feel about it.
Yeah, for sure.
About the Benedict option.
Yeah. So William Stringfellow says, if they honored the Bible more highly, they would appreciate that the Word of God will endure demythologizing, that the Word cannot be threatened by anything whatever given humanity to discover and know through any science or discipline of the world. More than that, if the fundamentalists actually took the Bible seriously, they would inevitably love the world more readily instead of fearing the world, because the Word of God is free and active in this world, and Christians can only comprehend the Word out of their involvement in this world, as the Bible so redundantly testifies.
Yeah, I mean, that just seems like so on the nose.
Yeah,
to
that's
me.
a very hot take on this whole situation, I think. That, like, you can't just separate yourself out into a cloistered community. That doesn't work.
Yeah, and even looking at how Stringfellow and Merton and Berrigan interacted with their own time, which, they were dealing with a variety of problems, but one of the most significant ones was the Vietnam War and nuclear proliferation. It's like that last line of what you just read, that they wouldn't have to fear the world, right, because God's word is free and active. That's exactly the kind of thing that you would have to believe if you were, say, the Berrigans and the other folks in the Catonsville Nine, who broke into a government facility and took out a bunch of draft documents and burned them with homemade napalm. Like you couldn't do that if you had a kind of Benedict option like fear and subsequent preservation. Like you would have to believe that you were being energized to really witness to something else.
Right. There's in those types of actions, there's such a I don't know, such a feeling that they actually care and love the world enough to get arrested for it, you know? That
Yeah.
like that it's just like worth it. And that seems 1,000 times more powerful than I don't know, anything else that the Benedict option does.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. At least that's what's compelling to me, and that's something that it isn't just like a Catholic phenomenon. Like Stringfellow wasn't a Catholic, and he put his own personal freedom on the line to harbor Daniel Berrigan and was questioned by the FBI. And it's like this is, I think, something fundamental to a certain thread in the Christian narrative.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe what we can say is that it's actually important to be in the world and doing things and not just being cloistered in your own community.
Yeah, yeah.
What a novel idea. What a crazy approach.
And out of faith as opposed to being like out of fear. I mean, that sounds like a cheesy thing that you would read in like,
No, that's
your
good.
grandma's like kitschy cross-stitched like whatever. But like I think I don't know, that I feel like that's right.
No, I think that's good, right? It's not it's you're not trying to change the world because you're so afraid of like what could happen. It's because it's the faithful thing to do. No,
Right.
that's very good. Thank you, Grandma.
Thanks, grandma.
Well, speaking of like Christian engagement in the world and sort of like faithful approaches to political actions, maybe this is a good segue into a new segment that we're going to start doing called Pope News. So this week we're going to talk about some recent things the Pope has said about giving money to the homeless. So Dean, will you kind of share the stuff about the Pope?
Yeah, yeah. Sure, I'll do my good Catholic duty.
That's right. That's why I asked you to do it
Yeah,
specifically.
I should really have you do it because you can't get in trouble for saying anything wrong here.
Oh
So
shoot! Yeah, you don't want to go to you don't want to go to Catholic jail or something.
yeah, that's right, exactly. Yeah, there's actually a large contingent on Twitter that's trying to actively send me to Catholic jail. So any fodder they can get.
I mean, how bad could it be?
Yeah, that's true. Well, probably bad. I would say very bad.
Yeah.
Okay, that actually is a good tie back to a crazy thing that Rod Dreher once said about what he calls the Lavender Mafia, which is apparently a network of pedophile priests who forced Pope Benedict to retire. So that's an amazing conspiracy theory. Totally support that.
Oh my God.
Anyway, sidebar. Back to Pope news.
Pope news.
Okay, so a lot of outlets covered it. I'm just gonna shamelessly plug America Magazine again, not because they're paying me to, but because it was actually the first hit I got when I was googling it.
I mean, they got good SEO. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, kudos. No one's finding my stories, but whatever. What can you do? So the Pope made headlines saying that you should give to the homeless and not worry about how they spend it as Lent begins. That was his big headline. So there are a few quotes, sort of, and paraphrase in this article included here. All right, so here's how the paraphrase starts. People who worry about how the money might be spent should ask themselves what guilty pleasures they are secretly spending money on, Pope Francis said. There are many excuses to justify why one does not lend a hand when asked by a person begging on the street, Pope Francis said. Some may think, I give money and he just spends it on a glass of wine, Francis said. But, he joked, a glass of wine is his only happiness in life. Giving something to someone in need is always right, the Pope said, adding that it should be done with respect and compassion, because tossing money and not looking in their eyes is not a Christian way of behaving, he said.
So this is a pretty amazing and radical thing for the Pope to say. That is actually super challenging, but I appreciate it on a number of levels. I don't know about Toronto exactly, but the biggest city I live near is St. Louis, and people are always actually complaining about these types of things. Like, oh, I don't want to give money to the homeless person over there because I don't know, who knows what they'll do with it. They'll probably just spend it on booze or whatever. And this actually just flies in the face of that completely. Pretty pretty hot take.
Yes, very hot take. No, I mean it's true in Toronto as well. I think it's just a general anxiety people have about homeless folks, and it plays into a weird narrative about liberal capitalism. That if you're homeless, of course, you must be, I don't know, some like bad, dumb idiot who like can't get a job or whatever. And then naturally, if you're an alcoholic, like that's also your fault, and you should, I don't know, feel bad about it, and no one should be willing to like help you out. And I love that Pope Francis makes that line about how what if wine is this person's like only pleasure in life? Like that would be enough of a reason. Like that wouldn't even be a reason to dissuade you. Like that would be a motivation to give that person money.
Right. It's actually pretty interesting that I don't know, that he talks like that. I don't know. That's not what I think of when I think of Pope nor Catholics, of being like, yeah, like do something that will make somebody else happy or something, like like embracing pleasure or like something good in life. I don't know. Usually we think of religion as something that's super oppressive and repressive. But this is kind of the opposite of that. Yeah. And giving something to someone in need is always right. It's really difficult, I think, to do. And I don't know, it's an actual challenge to people. Even if you are like politically on the left, to just like give is hard.
It is hard.
I I don't know. We can maybe just like, I think like the communist thing to do here would be to just like transform this into like, well, what the Pope is really meaning here is the owner, like, the collective ownership of the means of production or something. But he's actually saying something that's even harder than that. Just to give completely freely to people is pretty radical. Way more radical than like Marxism is, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's a very interesting way of talking about how you should behave under global capitalism, with just like radical free giving that like takes nothing of yourself. Like that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Do you think that level of like analysis is sort of behind this, or do you think that's something that you're just adding in? Like, does the Pope actually think that? I don't know, man.
I mean, okay, here's another good segue that will connect to this still within Pope news. So the Pope just celebrated his 4th anniversary of being the pontiff. And I was just going through like some links that I had saved over the last 4 years, kind of reviewing, I don't know, why I think Pope Francis is just like my favorite dad right now. And I remembered I saved this article from Telesur. The title of the article is "The Pope Hails Communism for Focus on Poor and Marginalized." The best part is that headline is not the most radical thing that the Pope said. At least as far as Telesur reports. In this interview with an Italian newspaper, La Repubblica, Pope Francis said, asked if his pursuit and support for a more egalitarian society meant he envisioned a, quote, Marxist type of society. The pontiff said in response, quote, if anything, it is the communists who think like Christians. Christ spoke of a society where the poor, the weak, and the marginalized have the right to decide. Not demagogues, not Barabbas, but the people, the poor, whether they have faith in a transcendent God or not. It is they who must help to achieve equality and freedom.
Yeah, that's very good. That's something I like a lot.
And it reminds me too of there's this photo that got passed around of the Bolivian president Evo Morales giving this basically it's a crucifix of Jesus being crucified like on the hammer of the hammer and sickle. So it like the viral thing that first went around was like Pope Francis was pissed about it. But it turned out that was not true. And he explicitly denied that, saying that, hold on a second here. Saying, I understand this work. For me, it wasn't an offense. And it is actually based on a crucifix that had been made by a Jesuit priest, Reverend Luis Espinal. Sorry for all of you who actually speak Spanish. Who was tortured and killed by Bolivian paramilitary squads in 1980, according to this article. And Francis prayed at the site of his assassination in Bolivia. So, it's like there's a very self-conscious connection here, and it's not like Pope Francis is naive about communism or revolutions. I mean, he lived in Argentina,
Right.
and that's a complicated history, but nevertheless, as the Pope, he's clearly this isn't even like beating around the bush. It's like, communists are the ones who think most like Christians. That's just how it is.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool line of thought. I mean, it seems obvious to me, at least. I mean, as a person who is both a communist and a Christian, like, yeah, I want to get that tattooed on my arm or whatever. It makes me think about how this all might tie back into what we talked about last time, about the dialogue between anarchists and Christianity and just the left and Christianity in general. Um, if it's the communists who think like Christians and not the Christians who think like communists, this should be like a perfect fit, actually. Right? Like to be like a leftist and a Christian should like work very well together, and I think that in fact it does. Despite like, I don't know, like Marxist critiques of religion or something like that. I don't know. What do you think? How do you think this plays into leftism and Christianity dialogues?
Yeah, well, I was just actually revisiting The War of Gods, which is a great book by Michael Lowy. The subtitle is Religion and Politics in Latin America, but it's kind of like a Marxist sociology of movements in Latin America that had to do with Christianity and the left. It's interesting because he ends the book sort of saying, well, what's the future of liberation theology? We don't know. It depends on all these variables. He leaves it very open-ended. The book was copyrighted first 1988, it looks like. So I guess when Pope John Paul II would have been the Pope. So if you had read that and then, Pope Benedict became the Pope, and what you might have remembered from him is that as Cardinal Ratzinger, he was not especially friendly to Marxists, though as a Pope he was pretty open to like leftist politics. But now we have Pope Francis, a pope from Latin America. You can only imagine reading these lines now in 2017, thinking the future of liberation depends on who's the next pope. And it's like, okay, well, that's pretty encouraging.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, sometimes when I hear about this stuff, I get kind of bummed because I'm actually not Catholic, and
there's still time, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I could always repent and submit to the Pope, I guess.
That's right.
I don't know. It just seems like kind of outside of the possible for me. But it sucks that there's like not so much of this going on in Protestantism. Like, it's pretty marginal, I think. You don't have any major church leaders coming out in favor of leftism, and maybe we can take all of us Protestants out there can take a little bit of this away. I don't know. That's what I want to happen, at least.
You think of some radical Protestant traditions like, Munster's Peasant Rebellion, which gets sort of valorized by Engels especially, and then later by the Frankfurt School, who obviously most of them are Jewish, but nevertheless there's a kind of Protestant theology that happens there. And there's an underrated Protestant movement in Latin America that happened alongside Catholic liberation theology. Actually, Lowy talks a bit about that, but a friend of mine is doing a dissertation on a guy named Rubem Alves, who's a Brazilian liberation theologian and a Protestant, and has a lot of interesting things to say along these lines too. So, I mean, yes, Protestants and Catholics should dialogue with one another about how best to relate to the left. That's a good ecumenicism.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as far as Protestantism in the United States goes, it's like, I think as far left people get is like nuances or like Stanley Hauerwas or something. So, yeah, more is required of us.
Except for, I would make one friendly amendment to include like a lot of trade union movements are massively Protestant-led, and the social gospel, despite it being something of a liberal movement, it does, and it did, like at least before the Red Scare, etc. It did feed into communist movements explicitly.
Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, the IWW, like they repurpose all of the hymns and stuff like that. There's definitely like a strong sort of like social gospel Protestant Christianity there, and also like a really helpful critique, I think, to a lot of Christianity at that time too. Utah Phillips, one of like the storyteller of the IWW. He always likes to poke fun at Baptists and the Salvation Army and people who were yeah, Christian churches that were supporting the bourgeoisie and not the workers and stuff like that. So that's true. That there's that kind of underlying radicalism in Protestantism, but I want a communist pope, man. Like, I need somebody, a Protestant who is basically the pope and also a communist. That's what I'm desiring. Okay.
A communist Jerry Falwell. That's what you guys need.
A communist Jerry Falwell is exactly what we need. That's my new novelty Twitter account, by the way. Communist Jerry Falwell. No, that's really gonna happen.
Communist. I'm gonna make this joke again so you can actually record it. But what is this guy's name? Baker. Jim Baker.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Jim Baker.
You need a communist Jim Baker. That's what you need.
Oh yeah, like a real punk Jim Baker who's like, no future, no future Protestant Christians. So let's smash capitalism and also eat bulk food. We'll have to link a Jim Baker video to the blog or something. That seems necessary at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. Please tweet us with your suggestions for topics or books or interview guests. Our next episode, we're going to be interviewing a great guy named Derek R. Ford. He has a book out called Communist Study, Education for the Commons. He is going to try to convince us why Christians ought to join actual leftist parties in the United States. So please tweet us your questions for Derek, and we'll see you then.
Solid. That's good. Cool.
It was the moon and there was fire. I stood before it. I felt desire. I didn't speak it. It didn't seem it was the time to talk about it. There was the moon